Good everyone, I hope you're having an amazing day. So today we will be talking about Apex triggers. So triggers are a very important concept you need to understand before you uh, go and attempt Platform Dev 1, or even if you're not planning to take Platform Dev 1, you still need to know, how trigger works if you're a Salesforce developer, right? Because triggers can be very handy at certain times, right? So if you're someone who came from a database background, right, say SQL Server or Oracle, you might know what triggers is about, right? So let me give you one scenario. Let's say you wanted to insert a data, let's say an account information to Salesforce, right? So before you insert, you wanted to make some modification behind the scene. A very classic, a very simple example. Let's say you wanted to append um, a name with the date field, right? So let's say user enters an account name as, let's say, Acme Solution, right? And then when your record gets stored into the Salesforce table, right? It gets stored as the name hyphen today's date or whatever date, right? So just a scenario, right? And another scenario is that once you insert a record, let's say, once you create an account, you want automatically contacts to be created and linked to it. So that's something you can do in an after insert trigger. So triggers, if you talk about triggers, there are different kinds of triggers. One is the before insert trigger, then after insert trigger, then you have delete triggers. So I'm gonna walk you through all those information today, and we're gonna do one simple hands-on as well, just to give you context how to create a trigger, right? So the first thing first, you need to log into your org, and I will be using the Trailhead documentation because Trailhead documentation is great. Rather than I'm reinventing a wheel or creating a slide, I prefer to use Trailhead, which is the source of truth for now. So as I mentioned, so the triggers, right? So we have something called, this is how you write a trigger. This is the syntax to write a trigger. So it actually tells you the trigger on an object name. It could be a project, it could be an account, or it could be whatever, a custom object or a standard object, right? And then these are the kinds of triggers we have. We have before insert, before you insert, for instance, an account example I gave you, right? An Acme solution, right? So you wanted the name to be appended with something, say a date. So that you can do before insert and before update. Let's say you are updating certain things, right? You already have a record in your database and you wanted to update something, right? So this trigger get fired on that before you update an information. Then before delete, so let's say you wanted to delete something and you wanted to do some operation before you delete it. So let's say you're deleting a custom object, and before deleting you wanted to make sure that you delete something else as well, right? Or and then we have after insert. After insert is very handy in case of think about a scenario when you create an account and then you wanted to create a contact, so you can do that here, and then after update and after delete and after undelete. So these are the triggers you can we have types of the triggers we can do, and this is an example of before insert, just very simple. And then, like you said, we have before triggers and after triggers. So as I already mentioned, so it's used to validate or update a record before they save. Yeah, validation is very important as well. So, and you can use the trigger context variable. See, I want to give you a very give you information around this specific information. So what happens is, right? So you are actually creating a new account, right? So when you create a new account, this trigger get fired. So this trigger, as you can see, before you insert this information, this trigger get fired and it updates the description to new description. Now you please pay special attention to trigger.new. And so trigger.new means it's your new object value. Say, for instance, you're creating an account, like I give you an example. I wanted to create an account with a name called Acme Solution. Then you decide to change the mind. So to new description, so that's where the trigger dot new comes in. It contains the new value, and there is something called trigger dot old. So that's usually comes into picture when you are trying to update something. When it's already trigger dot old contains an old value, right? So old information. Let's say I wanted to update account's name, an existing account name, right? So you can so from X to Y, just think about a scenario, right? Very basic scenario. You wanted to update a description from one thing to another thing, right? So trigger dot old contains the old value, trigger dot new contains the new value, right? In that context, right? And this is you can do before insert. So this trigger will trigger for on an account, before an insert, and after delete. And these are different variables, sorry, methods we can use it. So trigger dot is insert to just to check if trigger dot insert to say whether your trigger is actually doing an insert, or if it's doing an update, or is it doing a delete, or is it doing a before insert, or is it doing an after. So there are a lot of combination you can do it. So I would encourage you to go through this documentation. It's very handy. You should know when to use it. And as I mentioned, the new is a, and then we have a new map. It contains the list of IDs, right? And this is usually used when you wanted to trigger an error message, right? So and then you have old map, which contains the value of old. Okay, so what we're gonna do, first thing first, you need to log into your org, right? And we're gonna create a trigger today. So let me open this something called Porter. I'm not sure if you have Porter Beer. So Porter Beer, if you remember, if you've been following my previous lectures, you know that I've created something called Porter Beer, which is a custom object, right? So we're gonna write a trigger on this custom object, so which is pretty straightforward thing to do. So what we have, say when you create a new, just give you an example. Let's say I put the name as dummy, right? And Porter amount 10. Right, company you select, test, quantity, let's say 12, and I save, right? Okay, that's saved. So what the trigger should do, when you do, when I insert a data, right, it should append the porter name to dummy beer, right? That's how it should say. I mean, it should append the porter name with something, right? Say, I repeat it again. So you so you go here, you go do new, and enter information, blah, 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 yada, yada, right? And when you save it, right, your porter name, we'll say whatever porter name, let's say Carlsberg, right? That's the porter name. It's not a Carlsberg. I don't know if the Carlsbergs make porter. I haven't seen the porter. They usually make Pilsners. Let's say Baltica, right? The Russian beer. So they have Baltica Porter, right? So let's say I put Baltica here, and then I save it. It should, when you go and look at the information here, it should say Baltica beer, right? Pretty straightforward. Nothing complicated about it here, because we don't want to make a complex process just to confuse you. I want you to tell you the concept, right? This is very important. Because triggers are handy most of the times, depending upon the business requirement, right? So, okay, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna jump into Dev Console. To go to Dev Console, you got to go to this Gecko icon and go to Developer Console. And great, so let's close all these windows. These things we have done in our previous lectures, so it's good to close the tabs which you're not using, right? Because too much of clutter and noise here. Okay, right now I'm gonna do. Okay, just gonna save it and just gonna close it. Okay, all right. A file, right? New. See, initially we were dealing with Apex class. This time we will be dealing with Apex trigger. Right, and we're gonna do porter beer validation, right? Okay, let's look for the object. Um, so now you might wonder what are all these classes, right? Uh, I've created a Conga lecture. Conga is it's a very great tool where you can develop PDF documents using templates, right? So I've installed the Conga free version, so that's why you can see the Conga classes here. So don't get confused. In your org, you may not see this because if you haven't got the Conga installed. So so I'm gonna do to drill down a bit. It's just a pain, but it must be there somewhere. Okay, Porter Beer. This is where I wanted to do um, the Apex trigger for, right? So to verify if this is the right object, just go here and then go to your setup again and go to Object Manager, and because you wanted to make sure that you're doing the trigger for the right object, right? You don't want to create something for something else, and then you wonder what's going on. It's not working, right? So that's not what you want, right? Okay, so that's the right one. So submit. So what we're gonna do before insert, that's exactly what we want. And so we're gonna do for porter beer okay, p trigger dot new, okay, and so p dot, I don't know the name of the field, so let's go to the porter beer to find out what we're after. Porter porter name, right? Okay, so we got porter name equals to p dot porter name plus and give a space here, right? Hopefully this will work. Let's see. And we save it. Okay, so we created a trigger, right? So this will do a before insert. This will append this beer name with whatever name you enter plus beer, right? Okay, so what we can do, so go to this object and go to triggers here. You can see we already have this porter beer validation. Click here, and you can see the trigger that's been created here. You can edit the trigger from here as well, but I prefer to do you see, you can go to edit here and you can append or modify the things here as well, but I don't like to do it from here unless it's really required. I prefer to do things from dev console because I have enough control on that, because I like dev console interface rather than doing changes in a small squiggly window. I just hate it. It's not comfortable for me. I mean you guys might find it different, but that's my perception, that's my preference, right? You are entitled for if your own opinion. If you think that, okay, I mean, mind you, some people don't even like to work with dev console, they like to use Visual Studio. That's perfectly fine, as long as you are productive, as long as you're comfortable, that's all that matters. Sorry, I digress. Okay, so we created this validation, which is great. Now let's create a porter beer. Let's see if it works. Okay, so I'm gonna close it and let's gonna go to, hang on, sometimes it's just a bit weird, porter beers. Okay, so let's gonna create another one. I'll just call it Baltica. By the way, I do like this stout, 7 point something, 7.2. Tastes great. Sorry, Baltica Porter. They have 5% beer, and that's the classic one that's in the blue can. And they do have this 8%. 8% is a bit strong for me. I'm not a fan of strong beers. I mean, it's okay. I mean, but yeah, I would prefer to, I don't want it to get drunk and have a headache next day. I don't drink beer just for the sake of getting drunk. I drink beer because I enjoy the taste. I prefer to stay sober, so a couple of big pints here and there, and over the years I've become a bit picky on my beer taste. Sorry, I digress. I have to talk about beers. My apologies. Okay. All right. So we're gonna go save here. Okay. See the Baltica beer? It's appended. So the trigger did the job. That's pretty much what we wanted, right? Okay. Now what we're gonna do? Let's. We're gonna do one more trigger, right? Uh, I do not want anyone to delete the trigger, right? I don't care who your salesperson or anybody. I don't want any information to be deleted from this object, right? So let's create a trigger to stop it, right? Okay, so what we're gonna do, let's go to Dev Console again. Go to New, a Porter Beer delete validation, right? Okay, submit. Okay, so before delete, because we are not doing insert, right? For I think it's Porter Beer. All right, sorry, Porter. I often get confused with the syntax sometimes, but that's fine. Triggered out old. I don't like to remember every code syntax because you can Google that, right? I like to learn the concepts because I wanted to use my brain in an efficient way. I mean, there are tons of programming languages out there, right? You have JavaScript, you have Python, you have C++, you have C Sharp, you have a lot of things out there. You have COBOL if you're a COBOL programmer, and if then you have R if you are into data science. To do statistics, you can do using R, so they work in a bit different ways, right? Then yeah, and Smalltalk. If anybody's out there, Smalltalk, big shout out to you guys. I mean, Smalltalk. I mean, it's amazing language, Smalltalk. So, okay, so that's why I don't remember the syntax much. I mean, I know fairly very well every different programming language syntax, but sometimes I just have to Google it, right? Okay, because it's I don't it's not a sign of programs are not measured with the syntax. They measure with the way they write code, the quality they produce, right? That's my opinion, because if you can't measure a programmer with with the syntax, right? That's absolutely a wrong way to measure it, because anyone can memorize it, but that's not make you a good programmer. So yeah. Okay, so I guess it's trigger dot old map, right? Dot get p dot id dot add error, right? Let's see if it works. You cannot you cannot delete Porter beer records, right? Let's say I'll save it and let's see if it works. Okay, so what I've done, right? So let's say I wanted to delete two entries from a Porter beer, right? So as usual, when you try to delete it, right, you have to refer to old, because there's no such thing called new, because you're deleting it, right? You're not creating anything new. So we have to look into the new old map, old triggered or old values. And then I'm saying, okay, give me the list of, then I'm getting an ID, right? The trigger old map, which stores an ID. And I'm adding an error to saying you cannot delete the Porter beer. So let's see if it works. If it doesn't, then we'll figure out why. Right, so, okay, so I need to, all right, let's see if the trigger is created, right? I always like to double check. I trust it, it's there, but, just to demonstrate. And so, trigger, right, it's there, okay, fantastic. Let's go to Porter here. All right, just close this one. All right, I wanted to delete this one. All right, let's see if I can. Yeah, I will delete it. You cannot delete porter beer records, right? There you go, because the trigger is activated. So it's pretty handy, right? You can do a lot of amazing stuff with the trigger. Okay, so that thing is great. So these are two ways you can do. Then you can do for before update, whatever you wanted to do with that, right? So this is fantastic stuff you can do with this trigger. But please make sure that once you write a trigger, you need to write a test case to support it before you deploy to production. Any Apex code you write, you need to have a test case, right? And that's a different topic I'm going to cover probably at the end when we reach the end tail of the platform dev, because you need to know how to write a test case. I will tell you some of the challenges I faced when we get to that stage, so that you might find it very handy, right? Okay, so this scenarios are pretty straightforward, basic scenarios. You don't have to worry about it, right? When you write this kind of stuff, you might encounter a case when you have to trigger an API from a trigger, right? And you might get an exception saying, oh, you cannot call an API from a trigger or something like that, yada, yada, right? So remember one thing. You always have to annotate your API with the future methods if you wanted to use from a trigger. Otherwise, you will have issues. It will not let you do that, first of all. So let's go to the trigger documentation, right? Right. Triggers and callouts, right? This is what I mentioned. You need to use this a method with a future callout, and you can use this like callout dot, right? Callout dot something from here based on that. Let's say you wanted to, let me give you a scenario, right? Let's say I have I'm interfacing this with let's go here. Okay. Insert, right? This is the right thing. Let's say I'm interfacing this with a brewery or whatever, a third-party brewery, right? And every time I create a beer, porter beer information here, I would like this to be pushed to that third-party brewery, right? So obviously, what I'm going to do, I will call an API, when a porter beer object gets created. So you can use an API here, but the key to use API here is that if I have an API class, say, let's say this is an API class, right? Just assume it for a second. You need to put the dash as a future. If you wanted to use this method to push an API, you need to annotate with the future callout equal to true, something like this. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay. And you can also use other method inside it, but if it's not an API, you don't have to put a call out. You can use, object dot, static method that will work. That's sending out an email or doing some other operation, right? Let's say creating a contact or different helper methods. You can do that as well. There are a lot of things you can do using trigger. It's very handy. So yeah, this is the thing I wanted to cover today, and I would encourage you to please go to Trailhead and go through. I will put the resource down below, information down below. Please go through this information and practice yourself and create a business scenario and work on it, right? And please, I will encourage you to try that on your developer org free account. Please do not try that on your production. Please do not try that on your client sandbox. That is not a good practice, right? If you're using a client sandbox org, please do not experiment on it, because that's their sandbox, and you have no right to muck around with that, right? Please create a developer org. It's very easy to do that. There is a video. I've already talked about it, how to do that, right? So it's very easy to do, and this org is yours, right? You can do like I'm using. This is my free developer org. It's nothing to do with any client org. I don't have to pay for it. It's free. You can play around with it. Salesforce is amazing in that aspect, right? So yeah, I hope you got some value out of today's session, right? So please play around with the trigger. Think about the trigger. And it's very important to understand the concept, just by remembering, without practicing is not good enough, because you will experience in your real life Salesforce scenario to write triggers. You may be a Salesforce admin who knows how to write a basic Apex. They can write Apex triggers as well, because triggers are not often very complicated, like a complex customization, but it can get complex, right? So depending upon the skills that you have in your organization, a Salesforce admin can write code, right? Okay, cool. So that's all I wanted to cover, guys. So thank you very much for attending. I hope you have an amazing Saturday. Thank you.